Hey, it's Catherine. We're a couple of weeks into this federal election campaign now, so make sure you don't miss an episode of House Party, our special election show, which drops on Wednesdays. Hit that follow button if you haven't yet, and you'll get my weekly chat with fellow political nerds Danielle Thibault from Quebec and Jason Markusoff from Alberta. Now, on to the show.
Just like everything else that's gone topsy-turvy with national policy in this country, pipelines and climate change are no exception. Climate change has been really falling and declining as a top issue.
We're hearing a lot about pipelines in this election campaign. Climate change, not as much. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, we'll ask the experts. Could Canada have a new pipeline in the pipeline? And are greenhouse gas emissions part of this conversation? We'll also hear from the Green Party about whether the environment is still a top selling point and whether it's practical to ban Donald Trump from Canada. Plus, our political strategist panel on Pierre Poilievre's interest in crowd size.
How many people do you think we had last night?
Thousands.
Well, that's pretty obvious. I think you can be more precise than that.
To what extent do rallies help or hurt campaigns? Plus, the Liberal strategist who was at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump this fall on how the next Prime Minister should handle our neighbour. But first, energy, emissions, and the election. The House is now in session. It's remarkable how pipeline politics are front and center this election.
Who's ready for some pipelines to make us independent from the Americans?
We can't build Canada into an energy superpower if we can't actually get the shovels into the ground. To put it plainly, we need to get going.
The conversation is intensified by the economic threat Canada is facing from Donald Trump's tariffs. So we start today with a look at what the parties are pitching, what happened to the talk about climate change, and are the pipeline pledges actually realistic?
The issue is very much galvanized Canadians as a related part of all of the Trump suite of crises that we're having. And
Pollster Shachi Kurl is president of the Angus Reid Institute.
I think Canadians have had a wake-up call around this issue. And with the passing of time, I think we've also have forgotten about or the memory has receded into the back around the protests and a lot of the conflicts around First Nations and the legal aspects of it.
Conservatives have long been clamoring for new pipelines. Leader Pierre Poilievre is leaning in, pitching a one-stop shop for project approvals and pledging to approve those new projects within a year.
We will also bring in shovel-ready zones, areas that are pre-permitted for production. We will draw a big line, a big circle on a map, and say everything in this or that zone is pre-authorized for mines, pipelines, data centers, power stations, nuclear plants, LNG liquefaction terminals, and more. We'll do all the environmental studies up front, get the bureaucracy.
Liberal leader Mark Carney is also talking about building faster. He says he'll have a one-window approval process for projects, again, intended to avoid repeating work done by the provinces. Carney says he wants to make Canada the world's leading energy superpower, both clean energy and what he calls conventional energy, meaning oil and gas.
To be an energy superpower, we also need to get more conventional energy built, with a focus on making it as clean as possible, because we can't lose sight of our responsibility to address climate change. And we can't lose sight of the imperative to ensure the long-term competitiveness of our conventional energy sector.
But Carney and Poilievre disagree on the approach to getting these projects built. Carney is in favor of a cap on emissions from the oil sector. Poilievre isn't. Carney would keep industrial carbon pricing, also meant to curb greenhouse gases. Poilievre wouldn't. And Carney would keep Justin Trudeau's law governing how new projects like pipelines get green lit, though he says he would sign agreements with provinces to get the projects moving faster. Poilievre would repeal that law. Meanwhile, the NDP hasn't had much to say about pipelines, instead focusing on a pitch for a clean energy grid. They also want to end tax breaks for oil companies.
We're talking about canceling things like fossil fuel subsidies. Again, billions of dollars get wasted in that area. There's money going to highly profitable companies that we would end.
And the Bloc Québécois has pretty clearly said no way to a new pipeline.
Our answer is the same, will always be the same. There's nothing for us in it. There's nothing for the planet in it. The only thing that there is on the table is the intention of the two main leaders, Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre, to get some votes in Western Canada.
The Bloc is unyielding, but attitudes, including in Quebec, are changing, says Châteauguay.
There is support across the country in numbers that we have not seen in a long time for resurrecting long-dead projects. If you look at support for resurrecting Energy East, for example, overall 2/3 of the country are okay with this. They're on board with it, including majorities in British Columbia and, crucially, 47% of people in Quebec, per some polling that we saw last month.
The talk of pipelines may be politically alluring to some voters, but are these policy pitches from the two leading campaigns likely to actually get projects built? Rory Johnston is CEO of Commodity Context, an oil market research service.
The thing that I think is very similar between the two campaigns right now is this general positive vibe towards both the idea of, leveraging Canadian competitive advantage in resource development, but particularly kind of conventional energy development. But again, both campaigns, while they have released kind of mixed degrees of plans around what this will exactly look like, the Conservatives have talked about national energy corridors or national infrastructure corridors, as well as kind of a list of projects they would fast track. I think a lot of it is still, moving beyond the positive vibes. Like, how are we actually going to do that? How are we actually going to get, national corridors built when even specific projects have always had this kind of challenge, both on a regulatory angle, but also in terms of subnational governments and local opposition? Like, how do we push all that through? I think those questions are the tricky, difficult ones, and unsurprisingly aren't the focus of the campaign.
And where does all of this leave the conversation around climate change? Sarah Elizabeth Sharma is an assistant professor in the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa.
I have been very disappointed in the past 6 months in terms of the discourse and the action around climate action. The bottom line is that climate change costs Canadians. We are going into another summer months of uncertainty around wildfires, around other forms of extreme weather, such as flooding. It affects our industries. Climate change affects the certainty around our financial markets. It is something that I think we need to be more proactive about, and we have not been in Canada. I think we need to be a bit braver in Canadian policy and think about what we want our future to look like, what we want our summers to look like, how we want to think about we live in this environment and this beautiful country that we are very lucky to be a part of.
Pollster Châteauguay notes that for years now, the public attitude about climate change has been shifting.
Climate change has been really falling and declining as a top issue basically since the pandemic. So when you go back to December of 2019, you had 42% of Canadians saying it was the most important issue. It was the one they cared about the most. That feels like such a distant memory. We had the pandemic. We had inflation and the cost of living crisis. And today, and it has been a 6-year decline, but today, the number of Canadians who say that environment and climate change is the most important issue for them is down to 15%.
At the end of the day, though, a brand new oil pipeline isn't as easy to pull off as it once was, says oil market expert Rory Johnston.
We actually don't really have any major pipelines currently being proposed. If you rewind 5-10 years ago, we had multiple major pipelines. You had Energy East, you had Northern Gateway, you had Trans Mountain Expansion, you had Keystone, you had Line 3 in Enbridge's mainland. All of these things were all kind of vying for completion. Now the pipeline of pipelines is empty. There really is nothing else on the table or nothing major on the table. So when parties and politicians are looking to leverage this kind of rise in national patriotic support for these projects, the challenge is you don't have a project. So how do you kind of capture and kind of leverage that rise in support? Well, you pre-approve. And I think the hope here with these national corridor ideas, and the Liberals have also kind of vaguely suggested something similar, is that you can kind of capitalize on that support while it exists and hopefully entice more projects to kind of come to the board rather than trying to accelerate what is already kind of being proposed.
While political scientist Sharma wonders if the public conversation is all a bit misguided.
What happens with pipelines is that pipelines become a symbol of nationalist forms of extraction, and they become very much associated with the Canadian identity of what our economy is. So it becomes not necessarily an argument about the feasibility, the profitability of pipelines, but more so around, do you support Canadian energy extraction or not? Pipelines have been proven in the past 10 years to be quite difficult to develop. TC Energy originally attempted to build this Energy East pipeline in the 2010s, 2014, 2015, and then canceled this because of falling oil prices, contract problems, regulatory issues, challenging commercial dynamics. So there are changing economies of oil production and oil sands production, and uncertainty around if we are going to continue to build these projects and if they are going to be profitable because of forms of oil demand.
As more Canadians and elected officials gravitate towards building massive new pipelines, where does that leave the Green Party? How big a hit could the party take if Canadians are less concerned about the environment? We're focusing on a different party every week of this campaign. This week, it's the Greens' turn. Mike Morris is the Green candidate for Kitchener Centre. Welcome to the House.
Thank you, Catherine.
We just heard from Châteauguay Curl saying there's been a 6-year decline in the number of Canadians who say the environment and climate change is the most important issue for them. Does that make your party less relevant?
Well, even just locally in CBC KW yesterday, there was an article about folks who are quite concerned about the climate crisis here in Kitchener, particularly at a time when other parties seem to be backsliding on all of their climate commitments. The other reality, though, Catherine, is that we are in an affordability crisis, and the federal government just wasted $34 billion building a pipeline that will never have an economic return. The UN Secretary General very appropriately calls new fossil fuel infrastructure not just moral, but economic madness. If we want to address the affordability crisis we're in, we should be looking at the gouging of the oil and gas industry, which also happens to be directly contributing to the crisis.
When you say gouging, you mean subsidies, tax breaks for oil companies?
Oh, I mean how much they're profiteering on the backs of Canadians, up to 40 some odd cents a litre. In 2022, the carbon tax went up 2 cents a litre. Their profits went up 18 cents a litre. It's why the UK and other countries have put in place an excess profit tax of 30% to bring that money back to their residents. Greens have been calling for even a 15% excess profit tax on profits above $1 billion. We could use that money, that $4.2 billion, to invest in better transit, high-speed rail. My community is still waiting on a timeline for two-way all-day GO train service. This is the economy of the future. It's the jobs of the future, but it's also about productivity in the economy, too.
I hear your pitch there, but I am curious about the essence of the question, Mike Morris, which is, are you facing more of an uphill battle? Do you acknowledge that there is more of an uphill battle when your primary pitch is about climate right now?
Well, truthfully, Catherine, my primary pitch is about being a champion for my community. That's what I go to Ottawa to do every single day. And while climate is one part of that, so is the housing crisis. So is fighting for people with disabilities. And so while there might be that sense that Greens, of course, are really strong on climate, when I'm thinking about doing my job as the MP for Kitchener Centre, I'm a Green because the Greens allow me to stay true to my community, avoid all the political partisanship and hackery, and actually focus on getting things done and working with others to get those things done. Often, sure, it might be around addressing the climate crisis, but as an MP for Kitchener, it's about so much more too.
Fair to say, though, we just heard the two main parties speaking favorably about a new oil or gas pipeline. The Green Party would not support such a pitch.
Well, we would agree with Canadian mayors across the country who are pushing for an east-west energy electricity grid.
I believe that is part of the Liberal pitch and the NDP as well.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I'll work with them on it. Let's work on high-speed rail, which former Prime Minister Trudeau announced days before he officially finally resigned. There's lots we can work on together that we do agree on. We're keen to continue to do that work.
Your platform states that the U.S. is no longer an ally. The Green Party wants to bar President Trump from visiting Canada, offer the United Nations an alternative headquarters if required, expand refugee provisions to American journalists, scientists, and activists. When Canada's economy is so reliant on the United States, is it wise to poke the bear with the kinds of proposals you're putting out there?
Rather, I think it's about staying united and strong as a country and ensuring that when there is this threat from the U.S., that rather than taking partisan shots at one another, we work together. And so Greens are putting forward some ideas to consider.
How would barring President Trump from the country do that?
Well, Greens, again, aren't the only ones who have mentioned that.
The NDP as well.
NDP, right? And so I think this is a time for these kinds of ideas to be put forward and discussed. I think what's important, though, is as Greens, we're focused on ideas related to our economic sovereignty and protecting Canada from the threat of the U.S. and not on slogans and partisan shots against one another. That, to me, is what I hear from my folks in my community is let's make sure we stay strong and united. And it is a time for some big ideas for how we ensure that we diversify our economy, that we protect people's pensions, and that we stand up for Canada.
If we said President Trump couldn't come, even though Canada is hosting the G7, that would risk angering the United Kingdom, France, other governments that are part of the G7. So you say not just slogans, practical ideas. It's not clear to me how practical this one is.
Yeah, fair enough, Catherine. But the fact that we're even talking about it is, I think, part of why the party has put that idea forward. For my part, it's not the number one thing I hear from folks at the doors in my community, so it's not the kind of number one zinger that I'm focusing my time on. But if you want to hear more about it, you can speak with Jonathan Pedneau, one of the co-leaders of the party, and I'm going to stay focused on working for my community.
Okay, well, I do want to ask you about another national idea that your party is proposing, a 120,000-strong National Civil Defense Corps to help with national preparedness for climate emergencies. The Canadian Armed Forces is struggling to recruit soldiers right now, so how would you recruit more people, this significant number of people, to join a Civil Defense Corps?
Yeah, again, it's one of 38 ideas that's in this Protecting Canada plan that the party has put forward. When we think about how we strengthen Canada, a civil defense corps is one idea that Greens have put forward to be considered, and we need a national conversation about this.
I don't mean to be rude, Mike Morris, but I wonder, you don't sound all that committed to some of the ideas in your own platform.
Well, again, for my part, my interest as a Green is focusing on what I've heard from my community. And from my community, what I'm hearing is we need to strengthen our defense. We need to be thinking about how do we get to 2%. And as Greens, we've put forward ideas around what that could look like. You've asked a question that's a really good one around the practicality of it. I think that's something that still needs to be explored further. My interest is in making sure I'm responding to what I'm hearing from folks in my community and, being direct with you about, that's one of the ideas of many, including canceling the F-35 contract with the U.S., looking at procuring more from Canada, looking at incentivizing reducing interprovincial trade barriers, making sure we get retaliatory tariff revenue to workers in my community, to small businesses who need the support. You've asked about one particular idea of 38. There's a much larger story to be told here around how we protect Canada from the threat of the tariffs and this absurdity around annexation.
The last question I want to ask you is about your party itself. The Green Party has gone through several internal changes before this election began. It pursued co-leadership. Jonathan Pedneau stepped away. He came back. A lot of folks will remember the previous leader, Annamie Paul, felt very badly treated by the Greens. Your party's seat count has been stagnant for quite some time. For Canadians who are seized with fighting climate change, they like some of the things that you just pitched. How do you convince them that your party has its act together enough to deserve their vote?
My sense is that folks are looking for champions for their communities first and foremost. And when Greens get elected, like Mike Schreiner did in Guelph in 2018, folks say, hey, I want some more of that. I want somebody who's working for me rather than being told how to vote. Here's the slogan to repeat ad nauseum. Instead, here's somebody who's working for my community. That's what I've been focused on since 2021. And just a few weeks ago, Aisling Clancy in my community was just re-elected with over 50% of the vote. And so when Greens get elected, my sense is, if you look at everything from Peter Bevan Baker on the East Coast to Elizabeth May on the West Coast, Canadians see champions for their communities, working in their community's best interest under common values. But first and foremost, I'm here for Kitchener. And being a Green MP allows me to stay focused on advancing the interests of my community. And you know what? Working with other parties to do it rather than planting a party flag and pretending we're the only ones that care about it.
Mike Morris, I do appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation during a busy election campaign. Thank you.
Great to chat with you, Catherine. Thanks for having me back.
Mike Morris is the Green candidate in Kitchener Centre in Ontario. Lots more coming up on the House podcast, including whether rally size matters. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode. And tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. As the election campaign continues, CBC parliamentary reporters are out on the road following the main political parties. We've asked them to send us postcards about their travels. This week, we heard a lot about the party's supporters. First up, Marina von Stackelberg with the Conservative campaign.
Hey Catherine, this week I'm with the Conservative campaign and I've been attending some of the big Pierre Poilievre rallies that are getting so much attention. I spoke to one guy in line in Edmonton who joked to me, "I'm here for the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert." I've been to quite a few of these now and they do kind of feel that way. There's traffic jams as people try to find parking. Some just give up and end up walking from blocks away. Inside there's music blasting from loudspeakers and a merch table where you can buy Pierre Poilievre t-shirts. These rallies definitely leave people pumped up and energized. A man I spoke to after the one in Kitchener told me he knows the polls suggest the Liberals and Mark Carney have a lead, but he thinks they aren't painting a real picture of the support Poilievre has. Experts and pollsters say these events are drawing people who were probably already going to vote for Poilievre, not necessarily new supporters the party needs. Either way, it's something the Conservatives clearly feel is key to their campaign, and I can't imagine the logistics and resources involved in pulling these off every night. Most of them are in warehouses in industrial areas, so they don't really have bathrooms. The biggest rally was in Edmonton earlier this week. The RCMP says it had 12,000 people. There were 10 porta potties. So yeah, that was a concert experience too.
Hi, Catherine. It's Ashley Burke out on the road with the NDP, and there has been a lot of talk on this bus about crowd sizes and why we're not seeing leader Jagmeet Singh surrounded by tons of supporters. This week, I watched Singh meet with union reps in a small office, make announcements with a few candidates behind him, and sit down at a gurdwara to hear people's concerns. And throughout it all, his campaigns faced a lot of questions from journalists about why, when Singh's facing such dire polling and might even lose his own seat, they're not trying to get him out there at a rally surrounded by supporters. So incumbent NDP candidate Jenny Kwan came to Singh's defense and says, yeah, a rally does feel nice, but it doesn't drive home votes. And the focus right now is putting resources towards knocking on doors, canvassing, making calls. Singh's campaign seemed a little sensitive about crowd sizes and say it's not that they can't hold a rally or fill a room with supporters, but they call it a purposeful choice in this climate right now to focus on policy announcements to deliver solutions. Then it promised some, quote, hype-up events were coming. We finally saw that in Saskatoon when about 300 people packed into a local campaign office for a meet and greet with Singh. The music was blaring, supporters were chanting, Singh was jumping up and down with the crowd and said himself on the microphone, "This energy is what we needed." It injected some life into his campaign, at least for one night.
Hi, Catherine. It's Karina Roman. So I want to tell you about something that happened at a recent Liberal rally. One of Mark Carney's selling points in this uncertain time, at least according to supporters I've interviewed, is that he's serious, a steady, reassuring presence, and let me be frank, maybe even a bit boring. Now, as I see it, so far, Carney kind of leans into this image, repeatedly calling himself a pragmatist. So imagine many people's surprise at a rally in Scarborough when, during a pause in Carney's stump speech, a lady yelled out, "Lead us, Big Daddy." Yes, you heard that right, Big Daddy. The crowd laughed, and a clearly bemused Carney made a joke about taking a different exit to escape. The moment went, as they say, viral. And then supporters began showing up at rallies with giant handwritten "Lead us, Big Daddy" Bristol board signs. When the journalists covering the campaign this week discovered the Liberal plane had not yet been named, a tradition on election campaigns, there was really only one choice: Big Daddy Air. And then came the Big Daddy song on YouTube, with lyrics like, "Mark Carney was puzzled, didn't know where to stare. Was it economics or pheromones in the air?" So, of course, someone played the song on the plane, and some Liberal staffers danced and laughed at the lyrics, because it's clear this campaign is feeling confident. But this race is far from decided. We're only just past the halfway point in the campaign, after all, and no one can say for sure who will end up being Prime Minister. Or Big Daddy, if you prefer.
Lead us, Big Daddy, she cried from the crowd, with the power of a loon, calm, majestic, and loud. Trembled, the beaver stood still, and even the moose got goosebumps on Parliament Hill. Lead us, Big Daddy.
Okay, so that is the energy campaigns are seeing on the ground. But what does it mean for the race and the pitch to Canadians? Plus, we're just days away from the debates, the very first time Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre have ever faced off against one another anywhere. What should we expect? Let's ask our strategist panel. Brian Clow is former Deputy Chief of Staff for Justin Trudeau, and he has worked on several Liberal campaigns. Kate Harrison is a Conservative strategist and Vice Chair at Summa Strategies. And George Soule is former Director of Communications for the NDP. He has also been assisting the party this campaign. Welcome back, Kate and George, and welcome to the House, Brian. Good
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Okay, Kate, I want to start with you, and I want to ask, yes, about rallies, but more specifically about this moment where Pierre Poilievre was taking a question from Globe and Mail reporter Laura Stone about his rallies. Let's listen to some of his response.
How many people do you think we had last night?
Thousands.
Well, that's pretty obvious. I think you can be more precise than that.
I don't, I mean, the party said 10,000 registered. There's reports of 15. I really can't say.
One last question. When was the last time we had a rally that big in Canada?
I don't know. I've never been to one, a political rally that big, I don't think.
You know a lot about politics.
Well,
You're a very well-informed person. I know that if there were a bigger rally than that, you would know about it. I think so. But I think it was pretty incredible. Were any of you there? Yes. Magic, eh? Wow.
Kate, bragging about crowd sizes is distinctly Trumpy behavior. Why is Pierre Poilievre doing this?
I think Poilievre's drawing attention to the boots on the ground support that his campaign is getting, and frankly drawing some contrast both from what we see in public opinion polls, but also just the other candidates in the race. And I think, Catherine, important is to take a step back and realize what a big achievement some of these crowd sizes and gatherings are. At the height of Stephen Harper's popularity in 2011, the largest rally that they had in Peel region was around 3,000 people. Poilievre is consistently pulling across the country thousands more people than that. I think that drawing attention to that crowd size keeps your voters motivated and engaged. It provides a little bit of a counterbalance to what we're seeing in the public opinion polling, which obviously suggests a bit of a different picture. And Poilievre has been doing this throughout his leadership as well. So it's not just a campaign feature. So he's thriving on it. The people that are there are excited. There's a good mix of people there as well, I would say. And it creates a little bit of contrast from the other rallies, which have a little bit more of a status quo feel.
You say he's thriving on these rallies. Was that a good moment for him, the one we just played?
I've seen people kind of react negatively to that exchange. Poilievre has had terse, intense exchanges with reporters before. I didn't observe that in that moment in maybe ways that I have in the past in terms of things that he's responded to. I think that he was really just trying to draw attention to the fact that he is a unique political figure in Canada and very unique in this campaign in terms of the energy that he's been able to mobilize. So I saw the criticism. I think, frankly, even based on other exchanges that he's had, I didn't get the same read that other critics may have.
I agree that it was neither terse nor tense, but it was kind of gross. I mean, there was a professional journalist asking him a question, of which they only get 4 per session, and instead he took over, kind of leaned into the microphone, and in front of the whole country said, "How you doing?" And then never mind. Then you start talking about crowd size, and then they got into tried to do the bit of the size matters jokes. It was uncomfortable to watch, and I think 2 things. One thing this campaign has to do is try not to look like Trump, and I think that Poilievre himself keeps stumbling into that. And 2, it just they need to win women, and I think that turned off a lot of people.
Brian, I want to bring you in here because certainly Justin Trudeau had some big rallies. Pierre Poilievre making the point there that, to his mind, this is the biggest one in modern memory. What do you think the pros and cons are of holding a big rally in a campaign?
Well, I'll start by just saying I would agree that Pierre's interaction with Laura Stone was very Trumpy, and he's had quite a few interactions like that with journalists, and I don't think it comes off well, and he won't take my advice, but I think he should do less of that. In terms of rallies generally, they obviously have some advantage. They provide good pictures, good videos. It provides a crowd for the leader to feed off of. To me, though, it doesn't necessarily translate into votes and often doesn't. And to me, the big distinction is your rally organic? Are people showing up on their own to hear the leader? I'll give 2 examples. Trudeau 2015, towards the end of the campaign as he was surging in the polls, he did a series of events along the 401 at the end of the campaign, and people were coming out in huge numbers to see him. That, to me, was a reflection of where rallies translate into votes. A previous campaign I worked on, Michael Ignatieff 2011, he was actually drawing out very big rallies. If you look back at the beginning of that campaign, you'd see rallies of over 1,000 people, which at that time was fairly large. Obviously, that did not translate into votes for Michael Ignatieff as he tumbled in the polls. So that's the question. Are people organically showing up, or is this the campaign organizing large rallies and putting in a lot of effort to turn people out? My read is the Poilievre campaign is putting in a lot of effort to have very big rallies, and it's not so much organic.
So organically showing up versus rise up, which we would all remember was Michael Ignatieff's big phrase.
The challenge, I just want to add, the challenge is sustaining that, right? So they started big, and they've stayed pretty strong. Mm-hmm. It will be really challenging if we start to see that diminish in the coming weeks to still make the case for momentum.
I just want to quickly bring you in here, George, because I take the criticism that sometimes these rallies aren't a good thing. But to be fair, surely the NDP wishes they could muster 1 or 2 of these right now.
Well, again, I mean, I agree with Brian. Like in 2011 as well, we did the 401 thing, and I mean, we shut down streets in Kingston, for instance, and that was not planned when Jack showed up there. Now, again, we didn't win the seat in Kingston even then. I mean, obviously, we did pretty well, but those rallies, when they're organic, I agree, are fun, but they don't necessarily turn into votes. We've done, the tour teams had a different strategy with Jagmeet this time around, so we haven't pushed for those.
Do you think you could pull them off?
Well, a few hundred people showed up in Saskatoon the other day. And again, I'm not saying we're going to clean house in Saskatoon. I think we got a shot in 1 or 2 seats there. But yeah, we had 300 to 400 people in one room, and that was the first time we've really pulled a crowd in. So no, we're not going to, I don't suspect we're going to get 5,000 people in many places the way the Conservatives have been. That is admittedly impressive, but I do think the excitement is still there where we go.
I want to turn to the Canada-US file because, of course, it's so omnipresent. And Brian, I want to lean on your experience here. You were the lead on the Canada-US file under Justin Trudeau. You have been in the room with Donald Trump, I don't know, how many times would you say, Brian?
Probably about a dozen different times over the last 8 years.
I wonder whether you think the Liberals are capitalizing on Donald Trump's unpredictability.
I would say the Liberals are addressing the challenges and problems and the crisis that Donald Trump is presenting. There's no other choice. This issue is dominating the election campaign. Canadians are tuned into this, and they want to see how the different leaders are going to handle Donald Trump. And that's what I see the Liberal campaign reacting to.
Kate, Mark Carney paused his campaign again on Friday to have a cabinet committee meeting about Canada and the U.S. What does it mean for the Conservative campaign as we see him doing this multiple times?
Yeah, this is the third time, and it's not making as much sense this time, I think, to do so. This was a week, I would not say it's a good news week, right? Like there are still significant tariffs in place on steel and aluminum and things with which Canada has to grapple, but there was some reprieve. So to take the moment to pause the campaign, to tend to business, this week in particular, I think is really, frankly, milking a situation and creating a nice pregnant pause in order to make this remain the issue at focus for the Liberals. It is not a coincidence, in my opinion, that it falls on the heels of some very difficult questions and days for Mr. Carney around the use of tax havens, around this ostensible endorsement from the PRC, and other opportunities where he could have really had firm answer and not, convoluted responses to questions. So I think that there is a bit of an abuse happening of that ability to pause the campaign, and it is coincidentally after he's had a couple rough days on the campaign trail.
Can Pierre Poilievre be critical of that, or does it just look like sour grapes?
No, he can't.
Yeah,
he can't. He's not the prime minister. This is a really important moment for the country. It's an unusual time where you have to keep a foot on both logs, and Mr. Carney has to wear both those hats. I do think that there is a chance that Canadians will observe that is maybe being overused.
Okay, George, I want to get you in here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's squeezing that orange for every ounce of juice he can get out of it, for sure. I mean, and I agree. Like, the first two times were hard to argue with. This time, it's hard to justify. But at the same time, he is the prime minister. We are in an existential threat economically, possibly in the way of sovereignty as well. So he gets to do that. And frankly, again, like, he looks good behind the podium. This is the place where it's best for that campaign. So yes, I think he's abusing it. If I were in their shoes, I would be doing the same thing.
Brian, I do really want to draw on your experience.
Can I first address the allegation of abuse by the prime minister in terms of pausing his campaign to address these issues? Yes, at this very moment, it is not one of Donald Trump's tariff days where he's making some giant new announcement, but there is no shortage of issues to be talking about and to be focusing on. And the Prime Minister convening the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations is exactly what he should be doing at this time. The next Prime Minister will be sitting down with the President right after the election to negotiate a trade and security agreement, and that has huge implications that require planning by the government, and that's the kind of thing I would imagine they're focused on in meetings that are taking place. We just this week had Howard Lutnick, even though we escaped the reciprocal tariffs. Howard Lutnick was out in the media threatening Canada and calling on us to withdraw our retaliation. That's a very significant thing that should be talked about within government. So I would say the Prime Minister should be taking time off the campaign trail to focus on these issues.
So let me ask you then, what piece of advice would you give to the next leader, regardless of political stripe, about dealing with Donald Trump, based on the fact that you have so much experience with him?
So a few things that will be obvious to everyone is prepare for chaos and uncertainty. And one thing that is different now than the first term, and frankly different from what we anticipated last fall, is that this president and his administration is much more challenging than what we even faced the first time around. This president wants to go farther. He wants to test out theories that he didn't get a chance to test out last time. We saw that last week with his tariffs that he applied, global tariffs he applied around the world, which sent the stock market tumbling in a way I think they didn't expect. So it's going to be much, much harder for the next prime minister than what even anyone faced previously. Layer on top of that, it's not just an economic threat, as we've seen. This president seems to have an expansionist trait to him. He wants to take territory. It's not just Canada. It's Gaza, it's Panama, it's Greenland. We've got to keep dealing with that. And as the Prime Minister said, unless he respects our sovereignty and our territory, it's going to be challenging to sit down and negotiate a new trade and security agreement unless we get that.
Okay, I want to squeeze in one last topic here. We're coming up on the debates Wednesday and Thursday. Just like the candidates have a finite amount of time to make their pitch, I'm going to ask each of you to quickly lay out one thing you're going to be on the lookout for. George.
Really quickly, I think I'm going to look for Mark Carney to actually answer some questions on the tax haven, because I think he's been able to avoid those, and I think the debate's a chance for him to get courted on that.
Kate.
Jagmeet's got to take some shots at Mark Carney, get at his progressive bona fides or lack thereof, in order to really break through. Poilievre needs to look prime ministerial. He needs to not be the attack dog. He needs to present leader in waiting.
Agree.
Brian.
I'm going to agree with Kate and George that I'm watching to see, can Pierre Poilievre be anything other the attack dog that he's been his entire professional political career?
Really enjoyed the conversation with all three of you today, and obviously we are all going to be watching those debates like hawks. It's going to be fascinating. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
George Soul, Kate Harrison, and Brian Clow. Every week through this election, the House is taking you to a different corner of the country, a chance to check out a local race that tells us a little more about the big picture. This week, House producer Emma Godmere headed to Quebec to do some exploring. She's back here with me in studio. So, hey, Emma, where did you end up?
Hey, so I drove out to Châteauguay, Jardins-de-Napierville, which covers the Montreal suburb of Châteauguay on kind of the west part of the South Shore, stretches all the way down to the U.S. border, and it covers this very rich agricultural rural region that people call the Garden of Quebec. But what specifically drew me out there was the fact that this riding had the closest race in the entire country last election.
How close are we talking here?
12 votes. The Liberals beat the Bloc Québécois by 12 votes.
That is wild.
And there's more. The Bloc candidate, Patrick O'Hara, who is back running again, he thought he won on election night 4 years ago by more than 280 votes. He was all set to move to Ottawa, started hiring his staff, and it was about 2 weeks later that they finished the recount, which revealed he'd actually lost by 12 votes.
Oof.
Patrick O'Hara told me there is a lot that he took away from that.
It was probably the worst experience I've had in my life. But at the same time, I say it's been an all-inclusive. I got to win and I got to lose all in the same run. So I know either way it's going to go this year. I know exactly what to expect, right? And even the last 4 years on the ground, there's still people out there that thought I was elected. They didn't realize that it got turned around. So I've never had a day where I had a day off where somebody didn't talk about the 2021 election.
You can tell this is really on his mind. This is something that has stayed with him.
But it's really clearly lit a fire under him, too. Have a listen.
It's a good thing and a tough thing, but it keeps you focused on, how many more doors did I need to knock on? How many more phone calls did I need to do? How many people turned around in the lineup because it was too long and they said, oh, Pat's got it. That all comes back, and it's even more motivating now in 2025.
So it's worth noting, Châteauguay-les-Jardins-de-Napierville is surrounded by ridings that all went Bloc Québécois last time. When the boundaries were redrawn ahead of this election, this riding absorbed a big rural chunk from a block zone right next door. And if you zoom in and look at how that particular chunk voted last time, and you add it to the result from last election, Patrick O'Hara would have won this seat in 2021. And so in that respect, things could be looking good for him this time around, but it might come down to the state of Liberal support in Quebec.
Very interesting. Tell us a bit about the Liberal candidate here, because she is a bit of a star candidate.
That's right. Nathalie Prévost, quite well known for her advocacy work with Polly se souvient, or Polly Remembers, a group that has long campaigned for better gun control. She's a survivor of the École Polytechnique shooting, and you might remember this was a bit of a story in the first week of the campaign when Liberal leader Mark Carney got her name wrong and confused the shooting she survived with the one that happened at Concordia University years later. I asked Nathalie Prévost about that.
The fact that he named me Pronovo instead of Provo, for me, it's nothing. I'm just having trouble naming correctly my 4 children when I'm very tired because I just used the name of one for another. So for me, the difference between Provo and Pronovo is not a big deal at all. I understand that in 1989, Mr. Carney was studying in England. So he didn't felt what many Canadians felt in December 1989. It's a major marker in my own life. So for me, it's very difficult to understand that somebody don't know. And I'm a bit sad. But the major item there is not the mistake, is the fact that he talked about me. He talked about my situation and the values I want to protect. So that's what is the most important thing to me.
So, Emma, what is her pitch and the Bloc Québécois' pitch to voters?
So both of them brought up the Canada-US trade war, right? This riding goes all the way to the border. It's inevitable. It's on everybody's minds. The two candidates have slightly different approaches, though, in terms of how they see their potential role as an MP amidst all of this. For Patrick O'Hara of the Bloc, it's all about a deep local focus.
What I'm pitching to people when I'm going door to door to door is we need to make sure that we're well represented so that Quebec can intervene in any future negotiations and make sure that our industries are protected. You know, in this region, you're going to have aerospace, you're going to have farming, you're going to have AI, you're going to have distribution. When I go to Ottawa, I have one concern, is defending this region. I don't need to think about or worry about what's going on outside of here.
But I also asked him, historically, hasn't a vote for the Bloc been a vote for Quebec sovereignty? And so as we're hearing more about Canadian sovereignty amid everything with the U.S. right now, how does that change what the Bloc is putting in the window? Here's what he said.
It's funny now that we're hearing of a sovereign Canada. I've never heard of a sovereign Canada for the last 49, 50 years of my life, but now all of a sudden we're hearing about it. So what I'm happy about is that now they're sort of feeling what we're feeling here in Quebec, where we're a unique and distinct society. And it doesn't mean that we cannot interrelate and have good relationships outside of Quebec. It means that we want to make sure that we're not shortchanged in any future negotiations in the U.S. It means that we want to have our people from Quebec defending Quebec's interests and sitting at a table while we're negotiating what other, contracts or negotiations are coming up.
And how does that compare to what Nathalie Provost and the Liberals are pitching?
So she also brought up the importance of representing the area, representing Quebec. But her pitch to voters definitely focuses on Mark Carney and the Liberal Party, while also emphasizing her years of experience in advocacy.
I've been, in a way, involved in politics with my advocacy for gun control. But now in my life, why am I running with the Liberals is because I could not imagine a Canada run by the Conservative Party. And if I can play a role to keep our values alive, because I don't think that the Conservative right now are those who are able to maintain our values as I understand them, I really believe that the Canadian citizen needs to have a country where it's safe from assault-style weapon and military-style weapon. That's something for which I worked for the last 15 years of my life. I will never, never surrender on those beliefs.
What did you hear from voters in the riding about how they're feeling about their choices?
So not only is this region the garden of Quebec, lots of produce, lots of farms, it's also home to many of Quebec's wineries. I don't know if you knew that. This was new to me. There's a lot of Quebec wine out there, it turns out. And a lot of these winemakers have apparently been doing quite well lately, as they haven't had to compete with American products on the shelves in provincial liquor stores. I heard this from two winemakers in a small town barely a 10-minute drive from the U.S. border.
My name is Sébastien Déhoux. I'm the owner of the winery called Les Bacchantes in Hemingford, Quebec.
My name is Normand Guénette. I'm the owner of Vignoble Le Chaboté, which is another winery in Hemingford. We want to hear from political parties as actually having a plan for moving forward with Canada. Trump is an issue. The Americans are an issue right now. But once that's settled, what happens with immigration? What happens with the economy? A lot of people are listening to what's happening in the States and not looking enough at what's going on in our country.
I think for people around here, immigration is something to think about, not so much the composition of immigration, which is a debate in itself, but just how we secure the border.
Sébastien, who you just heard there, works in this riding, which he pointed out also includes Roxham Road. He actually lives and votes in Montreal. Normand, on the other hand, has lived in this area for about 25 years, and he is still unsure who he's going to cast a ballot for.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence.
This was the closest riding last election in 2021. The Liberals beat the Bloc by 12 votes. Does knowing that shift how you think about your vote at all?
Not really. I mean, the previous results don't really impact the way I'm going to vote now. It's more like we were saying before, voting for the right person that proposes a plan for Canada.
But it shows that when we say that every vote counts, this is a clear example where every vote counts.
Good reminder for people to show up at the ballot box, Emma. I wonder, the political dynamics have changed a lot since last time. Do people in the riding think that this is going to be a close race again?
I'll say this. You get the feeling that it's really going to be ground game versus how people are viewing the party leaders. And while poll aggregators like The Writ and 338 Canada currently suggest this riding could likely go Liberal, that's based largely on Bloc support plummeting across Quebec, neither candidate I met is taking anything for granted. And there's still 2 leaders' debates and 2 whole weeks of campaigning still left.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. This was fascinating. Thank you for taking the time, Emma.
You bet.
One of our producers here on the House, Emma Godmere. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the House is Kristen Everson, Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Thanks also to Caitlin Crockard. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.